Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your host on this Tuesday. Well, I'm recording this as I'm taping this. It is Monday, but it'll be Tuesday when you hear it. So welcome. Happy Tuesday. Hope everybody's having a good day. And I hope everybody's fantasy Sundays were profitable. And you kept your sanity, because I felt like I was losing my mind in most cases. Sunday was very eventful for multiple reasons, some good, some horribly bad. And unfortunately, this week, I am on the super bad end because my team suffered a heavy casualty that you just don't ever really want to see from anybody. No one wants this for anybody's team, but this is just, honestly, it's just depressing, man. I gotta say. It is depressing. Midday game. I guess we should go ahead and peel the Band-Aid off. So far, I'm up against my good friend David, right? He is projected to get 89.3 points as of Monday morning. He does have the Buffalo defense ready and locked and loaded. He got 11 points from Mr. Sly, Joey Sly from Carolina as a kicker. So he got bailed out there. He does need his defense to play on Tuesday against Tennessee. Devontae Parker came in with 13 great points. Zach Ertz had a 1.6. He had CeeDee Lamb, who had 8 receptions for 124 yards. He had Deontay Johnson starting again, and unfortunately another injury to him. 1 reception for -2 yards, so that's nothing, unfortunately, for him. Jarrett McKinnon, he really didn't do much, but not much of the 49ers players did anything at all, as it was a drubbing. We'll talk about that a little bit later. He had Dalvin Cook, who had a pretty decent day, but he also ended up with a bit of an injury near the end of that Seattle game. He had 19.9, and he started Lamar Jackson as his recent acquisition. And Lamar had kind of a pedestrian day, another day where we're wondering how bad is Lamar's regression really going to be, because not because we think Lamar is horrible. Like, we don't think Lamar has regressed as a player per se, but their team is really wiping the floor with these bad teams. And they're really just not, they don't need him to be what he was. Anyway, for me, I still have 3 players left to play. They're all on New Orleans. Of course, recently I told you guys about my trade for Michael Thomas, and he looked like he was going to play this week, but instead Michael Thomas got into a altercation, physical one at that, with teammate CJ Gardner-Johnson, or aka CD Deuce. If you know, you know. But yeah, Michael Thomas is not playing now because of that, and thus Traquan Smith is in wide receiver spot number 2, and Emmanuel Sanders is in my flex because Kenny Golladay is out with a bye week. Anyway, I had Greg Zuerlein, 14 points out of him. That is a strong performance. I had a -5 from Kansas City. It was a tough scene for all intents and purposes. Now, granted, I played against someone with the Kansas City defense last week, or this past week as well at the same time. So bad things, but if I can win this game this week against my opponent and I can take a win, I'll take that, and Kansas City will be the reason why for both of those to occur. Like I said, I have Emmanuel Sanders in my flex spot. Austin Hooper gave me a strong performance, 5 receptions, 57 yards, no touchdown, but 10.7 points is nothing to scoff at, especially from a tight end position that has been wavering for lack of a better term. I have Traquan Smith ready to go, locked and loaded at the wide receiver 2 spot. And I have Chenault Jr. at my wide receiver 1 this week. So technically, it would have been at my wide receiver 2. But as you know, Michael Thomas not playing. He had 14.9, no end zone, but he had 7 receptions. So his receptions are coming up. It's starting to peak here right now. I'm starting to see some signs of, hey, they may like this kid quite a bit. 7 receptions for 79 yards. He did have a big chunk change play, so keep that in mind. But there's nothing to scoff at whatsoever. I had Darrell Henderson Jr., who gave me a bit of a scare in the middle of that game. I don't know why he was put on the sideline with his helmet off, like he was benched or something, but he did end up coming back in the game. 21.8 points, 2 touchdowns, only 38 yards rushing, but we also know how that just goes when you get points, right? Got some receptions in there as well. Alvin Kamara is yet to play. By the way, I didn't mention my score. I'm down. It's 82.7 to 69.84. So it's a very winnable game with 3 players left to play. You can't imagine them all being not good, right? Even Alvin by himself, in like recent times, Alvin has been saving Mike Easter for weeks, and it might be time for the heroic. Let's learn how to speak today, Ethan. It might be time for the Herculean efforts. And finally, my quarterback, as you know, who I touted as a guy that you should definitely go out and target over the offseason, Dak Prescott. He got injured midway through the game. He had a receiving touchdown. He passed for 166 yards. He did have an interception, 13.44 points. And the injury was very gruesome. It was not fun to see. And honestly, it took me out of football for a little bit. It was very kind of depressing. Not just because, fantasy purposes. At the end of the day, we'll get somebody to replace him for fantasy. But the Dallas Cowboys could not replace Dak Prescott with what he's able to do on the field. And he was having such a great year. It's just really tough to see, man. In a world filled with COVID-19 and stuff like that, you forget that football is fleeting for so many different reasons. And, the Titans haven't played. The Patriots game isn't happening as far as I know. Things have been changing quite rapidly, but the one thing that's been a constant in football for years, of course, is, nothing is guaranteed, and you could lose the game very easily as far as your ability to play it. And hopefully Dak makes a full recovery to where, he doesn't have any further health issues, but that is something that, I don't know how he's going to come back from, to be honest. That was really gruesome. The angle that they got, in a way, was almost the most perfect angle to get to see somebody, get a type of break like that. He was in shock. Everybody was pretty down on the sidelines. It was kind of gruesome, man. Very grim. As you know, former head coach Jason Garrett, he came down. It was just a weird, perfect storm of events for that to happen, right? Like just the tackle itself, and then the fact that Tony Romo was on the call, Jason Garrett, like I said, the whole Cowboys thing, everybody was taking knees. It just was tough, man, real tough. Dak was obviously very emotional, and he's gone through quite a bit in his life since he's been in the league, but even fairly recently with his brother and dealing with, having depression and trying to speak on the mental health for athletes. He was definitely trying to make things aware. And this is just another adversity, obstacle to try and overcome for him. But hopefully he'll have a good recovery. He had surgery the same day. So all the best and more power to him. And hopefully he can recover. So, for the elephant in the room here, how do we replace Dak Prescott on our rosters if we have him? And what happens to Cowboys receivers? Because if you own Ezekiel Elliott, now this might be an opportunity for Ezekiel Elliott to get a bit more touches as far as just constantly running the ball. We might see a throwback Cowboys offense to say they may not be. I don't think they're going to let Andy Dalton cook per se. Like, he can throw the ball, right? Andy Dalton can throw the ball, but in recent years, Andy Dalton has not been some sort of gunslinger. It's going to be a tough out for a lot of these guys. We might see Michael Gallup. He had a good game relatively. They still won the game, so they have won 2 games so far on the season. I just don't know where this offense is going to go. I don't think it'll be as vertical, personally. I think they'll try and maintain possession, control the clock. You might really see one of those Cowboys years, once again, where they lean on Ezekiel Elliott for the long haul and hopefully try and make something out of this season, because like we see, the NFC East is very winnable. It's still very winnable. They got their first win as in Dallas against a division opponent, I believe. So that always is very meaningful. And of course, the Eagles take another loss, so that's going to hurt for them. They already lost to the Washington football team, so division is kind of up for grabs. And Dallas always seemed to be the team that was most equipped just based off of offensive talent. And the Eagles' offense is very injury riddled. And most teams in the NFC East are not, free of injury, right? So everybody's had some injuries here or there. And the football team, they have another injury at their quarterback position. As you know, Kyle Allen started the game. Dwayne Haskins was benched for one, essentially. He was taken out of the starting lineup, and then he had an illness, not COVID related, to where he didn't travel with the team. And now Kyle Allen has an injury, and they've had to put in Alex Smith, which was a great story. It's kind of ridiculous how the chain of events that happened today ended up occurring. Alex Smith recovering from an injury, 17 surgeries. No one thought he would play football again. People were scared if he had to come in the game. People were worried that he wouldn't be able to hold up, and they just didn't want to even see him play. The fact that he's walking, some people say, is, a miracle in itself. But he did end up playing. It wasn't great. Washington definitely lost really bad. And, we just have to see what exactly is going to come out of that situation. But the Haskins thing is very concerning. I don't know if this is just trying to, get a rise out of Haskins, trying to get the most out of him, one of those coaching things, or maybe they're really just done with him now, which would be kind of crazy. But yeah, it's weird because Alex Smith, of course, he comes back. It's like the Phoenix Rising, and then the whole idea of a phoenix is that it falls and it rises, and unfortunately the Phoenix fell in Dallas this week. So let's continue on here, right? How do we replace Dak Prescott? Well, you're not going to replace his production, I don't believe. That is number one. His production, as far as I can see, is not going to be replaceable unless somehow you're able to get off a Russell Wilson trade or a Patrick Mahomes trade. That's it. That is it. We are in bad times if you own Dak Prescott. It's not great, right? So from his 2020 game log, from week 2 on, 39, 27, 37. That's it's just honestly, he was balling out. He was having excellent time. And this is without him really rushing the ball as much. I mean, in Atlanta, he had 3 rushing touchdowns, but, he's not running to pick up yardage or anything like that. He was just doing his thing. So the only real options you have here is the free option, which would be to go to waivers. If you're in if you have a waiver budget auction thing going on, you might have to, go into the pockets a little bit deeply to go get Andy Dalton, the immediate replacement for Dak Prescott, or, that seems to be the way I would assume that would have to go for most people, if you're not in a waiver budget auction situation, you may want to just claim the waiver anyway, like immediately claim the waiver. Unless there's somebody in a worse situation quarterback wise, I don't see many people having to go get him. But if somebody does go get him because they're grime and they're going to try and make you trade for him, just trade for somebody else. I'm not going to sit here and tell you to beg and plead somebody to just trade you a quarterback, because, you know, a lot of people are walking, at least in my leagues, are rocking 2 quarterbacks right now because they wanted to have their replacement ready to go so they wouldn't have to drop a player they felt important. So that is definitely the case in most ways. But, you know, try and ask around, see if somebody will cut you a deal, and hopefully they don't try to grime you. But we're going to take our first break and then come back, and we're going to continue on what happened in Week 5, as it was an eventful one. This is the GSMC. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC fantasy football listeners, we are back. And we're going to continue on our discussion of what really happened Sunday at Week 5, on Week 5. And let's just go ahead and get right into it, shall we? The 49ers have a strong quarterback issue, one that I just did not see coming, just because the way they played last year. You know, they didn't really need quarterback heroics by any means, but they got shown up and beat down by the Miami Dolphins. Ryan Fitzpatrick, you know, Fitzmagic, he came to play. Devontae Parker and Preston Williams, especially, who was on my bench with 20 points. Hopefully I don't regret having him on my bench. You know, typically I don't regret when somebody on my bench does something really powerful, because, you know, if they didn't show you that that was what they were capable of in the beginning, you know, you can't really blame yourself at the end. So that's what I try to do. But the 49ers have a bad quarterback issue. You know, they had C.J. Beathard in there after they benched their quarterback, starting quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, who came back after injury, and he was not good. Jimmy Garoppolo was missing throws. He threw a couple interceptions, and he was pulled. And I think we've seen so far only one team that's able to pull a starting quarterback and find success, and that's the Chicago Bears, because they keep doing it year after year. And somehow they still end up keeping the winnings up, for lack of a better phrase there. But it's not looking great for the 49ers, who are all in all in a very tough division, right? So the Rams are 4-1, Seattle's 5-0, and we have the Arizona Cardinals, who have a 3-2 record after they finally get themselves a nice, or should I say I don't want to call it a gimme. They play in the NFL, but they played the Jets. So they got to win against the Jets, and that should get them back on track to what they were looking like in the beginning of the season. Real quick on Arizona, right? DeAndre kind of returned back to form. He did have a big touchdown that helped him out because he wasn't scoring that much. Kenyon Drake got in the end zone. That was promising, right? Kenyon Drake. If you traded for him, maybe you're feeling like, wow, this is all you could ask for, especially considering where he was right earlier in the season, particularly literally last week. But Kenyon Drake gave you 13 points. You can't scoff at that, right? I would say that is something that you can't you can never really say, well, wow, Kenyon Drake didn't do it for me right there. He did it for you this week. 60 rushing yards and a touchdown, that solves a lot of issues for you for right now. But, DeAndre did his thing, 25 points, 6 receptions for 131 yards and a touchdown. He got it done. Kyler Murray still kind of concerns me at times, but all in all, he had 26 points, 380 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and he did have an interception, so the interceptions are still there. But, that division is going crazy. DK Metcalf, a guy who I wanted to target, never got to get him. But I keep telling you guys, what did I say at the beginning, in the offseason, should I say, that DK has a chance, right? DK has a chance. DK has a chance to do what he's doing right now because of the trajectory of guys that are like him in this league. DK, over the last 5 weeks, 19 points, 19 points, 19 points, 14 points, and 27 points. His lowest receiving yards have been 92. 92 in a game against New England, 4 receptions. He had a touchdown in every game except for the game against Miami. And he had his most receptions against Minnesota in week 5. The dude is a beast. He is a red zone threat. He's a deep threat. He is an animal. And, just about 600 yards on the year, he is tearing it up. Right? He is legit tearing it up. So, patting myself on the back on that one. DK Metcalf is a guy who is really exceeding the value that he was probably drafted at right now. So, congratulations if you ended up getting DK Metcalf. And it's also very strange because we have a Tyler Lockett thing going on where I don't know if they're just taking him out of the game as far as his ability to, or he's just one of those guys who, because he's a deep threat, it's going to be a bit tougher for him to get what he has been getting before, because it looks like DK is really emerging as the guy in that offense. Tyler Lockett only 4 receptions for 44 yards. It's been a tough few games for him, especially last week's game. It was not it's not pretty. And of course the Rams are finding ways to just get wins, man. They look really strong. Their defense looks very strong. Aaron Donald is an MVP candidate. Let me repeat. Aaron Donald is an MVP candidate. No debate there. No question marks. No wondering why I just said that. He is an animal. And the Rams look like they're doing what they've been doing. They've run the ball very well. Their offensive line looks healthy and really good. And they get in the play action game. They get in the short passing game. They know what they like to do. And they're a team that was built to win last year. They had some injuries, and it was just strange. The offensive line literally fell apart last year, and thus you get a record that you saw, right? They weren't horrible. They didn't go like 5-11. They went 7-9. So it wasn't like they weren't competitive in most games. It just was kind of up and down. And now we're seeing what they're capable of when they are healthy, which is a 4-1 team. And you could argue that they could be 5-0 if they weren't a bad call. But I'm not going to sit here and talk about calls in the 49ers, if you know what I'm saying. So, yeah, their division, as in the division of 49ers, is the best division in the NFC right now. I don't think that's not fair to say. And it's going to be an uphill climb from here because eventually they're going to have to start playing division opponents, and they already did, and they took a loss to Arizona, so that's not good. Moving on, I guess we should go ahead and get right into it. The Falcons are 0-5, and they have fired Thomas Dimitroff, and they have fired Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn's firing news came probably 10 minutes after the game ended. It just was not made official. Of course, the official announcement should come Monday or Tuesday. And Thomas Dimitroff was fired also in the breaking news. maybe a few hours afterwards. That's when I started to see it. But both were gone. Side note, Thomas Dimitrov, low-key looks like Tony Stark. Very interesting thing right there. But, yeah, the Falcons, 0-5. What do they do now? What happens to their team? How do they play? I think Derek Cutter is the interim coach, but I haven't heard what the official announcement is. I'm sure it'll come out sooner rather than later when they make the official announcement of the firings. But that's where the Falcons are. I don't want to say we. I don't support that team personally. But, it's been a long road for Dan Quinn. Out of his, I believe, 6 seasons with the Falcons, he hasn't had more than 2 seasons where he doesn't have a losing streak in it. Of course, the Super Bowl run, and then he had another run where he made the playoffs. But this was kind of the writing on the wall. I didn't know if it would happen this week, but I guess because they lost to a divisional opponent, it was kind of a long time coming anyway. It didn't seem like Arthur Blank had any, malice in his heart or anything like that, who wanted I just don't understand. I don't know why it took so long, man. I can't hold back. I don't know why it took so long. It had to happen. I know that people like Dan Quinn, and that's the biggest thing why his job was secure for so long. But all in all, man, it just was a tough scene. And I'm also really wondering what his coaching, pedigree, where that's at now, because of the 28-3 and then the recent games. I mean, recency bias plays in a whole lot of things, as when coaches get fired or get rehired, right? Of course, we saw Jason Garrett get a offensive coordinator job after the Dallas firing, but I don't know what happens to Dan Quinn, because the biggest thing that Dan Quinn got brought in, he came from the Legion of Boom years. He came with the Cover 3 defense and all that. He brought that to Atlanta. And for the most part, it has never panned out for them. They tried to replicate Seattle's Legion of Boom type of play style, and it's just too difficult. People dot up zone all the time, all day. And when you don't have a pass rush, when you draft a guy in Vic Beasley and it doesn't work out, things like that happen, right? You will lose a couple games here or there that you're not supposed to. And I think that's the biggest thing. There's one thing to be kind of like middling and not as strong as the strongest teams, but you got to win the games you're supposed to. And they did not win the games they were supposed to twice in back-to-back weeks. And then they put up a really bad performance against Green Bay on a national stage. And then they lose to the Carolina Panthers. It's just too bad, right? He started off 1-4 last year. He starts off 0-5 this year. It just seems like this was the move that was going to have to come anyway. So, with that said, what happens? Julio's still hurt. So, we talked about it last week that if you were looking to trade for Julio, you may want to hold off, because we really just don't know what this Falcons team is going to look like. Calvin Ridley has presumably cooled off, right? I would say. And it has almost been a bit, well, let's remind ourselves. He's cooled off, but not in the sense of his numbers last week, right? He had 8 receptions for 136 yards. He had a couple drops, but that game, I wouldn't call it garbage time, but it was a bit of, he would get catches, but they weren't meaningful. So meaningful plays, he just wasn't there. He's just getting numbers. Of course, he did nothing in the Green Bay game, so he made up for that, I suppose. Chicago, 16 points. Dallas, garbage time. Seattle, garbage time. Right? So that's worked for fantasy-wise, but for team-wise, there's no impact players. Right now, I would say Todd Gurley had his best game in like 2 years last week, and it just didn't feel like it mattered at the end of the day. But I will say the prospect of them running the ball in a situation like this seems to favor someone Todd Gurley's or Mr. Hill very well. So that will be something to monitor if you are having Falcons players. I picked up Hayden Hurst on a whim in one of my leagues because I needed to replace a hurt Jordan Atkins. He didn't do really anything. Matt Ryan missed Hurst all day yesterday. It was actually painful. But yeah, man, the Falcons let him go. You just have to wonder what's going to happen to the rest of their team. Now, their defense is banged up, and it hasn't been that great. They have a lot of young guys in different positions. It's going to be just an uphill battle. But I will say there's optimism to be here. I don't think the Falcons are this bad. I think they've been – a lot of things have to deal with the culture around you. And for all intents and purposes, I think the culture was good in Atlanta as far as, like, coaching. Like, everybody seemed to like Dan Quinn. It didn't seem like they wanted a coaching change out, at least what they showcased to the media and how people talk about Dan Quinn. I don't think it was people were wanting a change because they don't like Dan Quinn. It was just the situation at hand. And at the end of the day, a lot of people need the idea of a culture change is just visual. If you see Dan Quinn, you know what you're seeing. 28-3, you have the whole nine. Some people are saying that for Matt Ryan too. That's why some people say if the Falcons, keep losing this bad, they might be in the Trevor Lawrence race, which I think is foolishness. But that's the vision board right now. That's their reality, and I don't think much will change it until later on down the season. I think NFL is a war of attrition, and if they can figure some stuff out like they did last year and put some drives together, put some wins together, because in reality they should have 2 wins. That's the bottom line. If you want to say they're 2-3 and they still fire him, fine, right? I wouldn't be against that personally. He was justifiably fired he would be justified if he was fired last year, and that's that. But the Falcons shouldn't have lost 2 of those games, right? That's the thing. So we're going to take another break, and we're going to continue on with Week 5 topics and discussions right here on the podcast. GSMC will be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back. GSMC Fantasy Football Nation, and quick shout out to the LA Lakers and LeBron, champions. The Lakers have come back and brought a title back to LA. It's been a long time, and LeBron did it, man. He did it again. He got his 4th ring. So shout out to him. I was just about to say, Cleveland, this is for you. As we segue into more fantasy discussions, Cleveland, this was for you. The Browns, right? 4-1. You heard me here. 4-1. Cleveland. What's happening? Now, there was a bit of a injury to quarterback there in Cleveland. And Baker Mayfield, he has a rib injury. I think he's supposed to be getting x-rays this Monday. But yeah, man, Cleveland is 4-1. Things are getting interesting. So they beat the Colts, who have, for all intents and purposes, has a really strong defense. There is some scoring plays all around, and we saw what their roster is capable of without, one of the best running back prospects in the league right now, in Nick Chubb. So without Nick Chubb, we saw a really, really great game from Kareem Hunt, 72 yards, a receiving touchdown, 18 fantasy points. pretty strong performance if I were to say so myself. Of course, I have Austin Hooper on my team. He did his thing. Odell had 5 receptions for 58 yards. So, not great, especially after coming off such an offensive explosion last game, but at least he's getting some sort of touches. But that's not what you really want from an Odell type of player. But this is what the reality is for that team anyway. I believe Jarvis had a really good game in of his own right. So, yeah, Jarvis Landry had 4 receptions for 88 yards, no touchdown, but that's fine. They run the ball quite a lot, and I think that's the biggest thing. Kareem Hunt's value is going to do nothing but go up, and that is to be the case for majority of the time. Cleveland is in a interesting position, man. So, Cleveland is 4-1. I just have to get used to saying that, right? Cleveland is 4-1 on the year. They have games coming up against the Steelers and the Bengals and the Raiders. They've beat every team that they're supposed to. They beat the Bengals. They beat Washington. The Cowboys they beat pretty handily until the end. And they beat a Colts team that people were saying was pretty good. The Steelers is going to be a real test, their latest test against a team as strong as the Raiders. As strong as the Ravens potentially. And they play the Bengals again. We know where the Bengals are at as a football team. We don't have to talk about it. And I keep saying this. The Bengals are competitive to a fault, but they will not be competing in their own division because the division just is overall just way too talented. And the Bengals roster is not that talented. Then they play a Raiders team who got another big-time win this week against the Chiefs. We'll talk about that probably a little bit later. But the Browns have a chance to probably get some really good statement wins if they can get it together. And we've seen the Steelers recently. Their defense is still very powerful. Don't get me wrong. Their defense is really strong. But we've seen teams be able to put up some points against them because overall your defense can be very strong. But let's keep in mind that offenses are just so advanced now. You can't always just have stifling defense. I think the idea of having a stifling defense in this year's era of NFL is foolishness. You just have to be able to get timely stops. You have to be able to get timely turnovers because you can be really good on first and second down, but if you can't get people off the field on third down, you're just going to have a bad time. And if you can't get turnovers, you're just going to continue to have drives where you just are trying to hopefully stop people from getting field goals. And it's just really tough to stop some of these offenses, especially the way people play, spread out their receivers, all the weapons that are coming across the league and all that. But the Browns have a really strong opportunity here. But if Baker Mayfield is not going to be able to go with a potentially broken rib, that is going to be something that can really hinder them, right? That wouldn't be great. But they have Case Keenum, who has won some games. I don't think anybody's starting Baker Mayfield as a quarterback in many leagues. Maybe if you're like super deep, but other than that, just got to keep it pushing, man. You just got to figure something out. And yeah, man, the Browns are 4-1. I just got to keep saying that. They are, teams are changing. Fantasy teams, real life teams, things are changing. And that means we got to talk about what are the prospects of coach firing. Once again, we've had 2 go in the last 2 weeks. And, they were both in the top 5 of the coach firing rankings, as I would see them. Maybe not the first 2 I would have thought would have went. Well, maybe Dan Quinn was tied for first for a long time. Adam Gase seemingly is going to stay the head coach there for the remainder of the season, but I'm pretty sure he's just a dead man walking. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes next week, right? Maybe they just feel like since Dan Quinn was not able to keep his job, maybe they can fire their head coach. How worse can it get, right? Is maybe the thought process. Speaking of the Jets, Le'Veon had his first game back. He had 7 points fantasy-wise. That team is just abysmal, man. It's just tough. Was it Jamison Crowder who had a decent performance last week? I don't remember off the top of my head. We'll get the statistical guys on that. We'll get our research team on that. Side note, our research team is me. I am the research team. But, yeah, man, the Jets are just not great. The Giants, they're not great either. But Dallas's defense is horrific. And, you know, every time you think that the Giants should find a way to get a win, you just got to remind yourself that they just aren't ready yet, in all intents and purposes. They've had chances to get a couple wins, to add some comeback drives prepared that just haven't panned out. So the Giants, of course, are winless among a few teams. But let's continue on here, talking about these coach firings. So we all know Bill O'Brien is gone as GM and head coach. Dan Quinn is gone. Coaching vacancies all over the place. We know what people are scouting for coaches. We know where the eyes are being peeled at, so to speak. A lot of things are beaming towards a potential Kansas City coach hiring. And we all know who that guy is. We don't have to really review that. But as far as coach firings, Philly takes another loss. But it seems to me that the panic has kind of calmed down on the Carson Wentz thing. I mean, you kind of know what he is right now. And we're getting back to what happened last year where his receiving core is all over the place. You know, Greg Ward is a guy that is stepping up, so to speak. They have this rookie who's turning up, so to speak, as well. You know, it's just a pretty injury-riddled team once again, and Carson Wentz is going to have to play hero ball again, and that's what got him in trouble in the beginning of the year, and now it's just, I guess it's pseudo-justified once again, so we'll see what happens. But, yeah, man, Carson Wentz, he tried his best Sunday, and it just wasn't enough. Unfortunately, the Steelers' defense is pretty good. They got some timely interceptions, some timely plays made. But I don't know where Doug Peterson lands on the coach firing tier list right now. I think that whatever happens in that NFC East may end up amplifying certain things. So they are not out of the NFC East. Nobody technically is out of the NFC East. Maybe if you want to rule out the Giants, but even then, it's kind of just like anything can happen. Anything can happen up there. So what can you really do when there's no real clear-cut, dry kind of answer to that? I would say Adam Gase is still somewhere in the top right now, and we have to rearrange some things. You know, Matt Nagy gets himself a nice win against Tampa Bay, and he was, I was starting to smell some chum in the waters. If they couldn't have pulled that game out and they would have slipped into another loss, I could see him creeping up in the coach firing ranks just because of how this quarterback situation is being handled. And I don't want to say Matt Nagy's a bad coach either. Like, I don't think he's a bad coach whatsoever. But the coach firing tier list, it holds no bar for no one. But as far as everybody else involved, we'll have to wait and see. The Chargers, of course, they will be 1-3 until the Saints game, so we'll find out. But I don't think that necessarily means that, you know, Anthony Lynn is going to get the can. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does. I think just based on record alone, he might be in the dangerous waters. Same thing with Zach Taylor, even though I think Zach Taylor needs at least 1 year with Joe Burrow and another draft before we have to start thinking about the Zach Taylor coaching changes. That would not be great. Mike Zimmer is having a strong comeback until he takes another loss against the, you know, if they would have got a win against Seattle, that would have been a very strong win. But ultimately, they ended up not having enough in the tank. Russell Wilson had another stupendous performance across the board. Honestly, I think right now everybody else is in a sort of a stalemate as far as the coach firing list goes on. And that's just kind of where it is. There's so many new coaches across the league that are still losing bad, is that you can't just sit here and say, yeah, after 1 year they're going to let them go. Now, of course, We did see that with Freddie Kitchens, but that's the whole different stratosphere of a situation. They had too much talent, had expectations, and it just went as far left as you could possibly believe. So the coach firing tier list is kind of at a stalemate right now. There's some guys that we can monitor. I didn't even talk about Brian Flores, because Brian Flores is getting some dubs, man. He's getting some wins with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Doesn't have to force himself into the Tua situation. He's not going to stab his starting quarterback in order to get his rookie in there to get some games in. So that alone is a very good sign for him. Real quick, let's move to another 5-0 team, the Steelers, man. The Steelers are 5-0. Mr. Claypool had himself the game of a lifetime, 4 touchdowns, 40-something fantasy points. He was on somebody's bench, I know for sure. And what does this mean for Deontay Johnson? He, until we know what the injury is, full timetable, it might be a bad sign if you still have him. I might want to get off him, either a trade, or you might just want to find somebody. If you can get Claypool off waivers, that'd be nice, but I think a lot of people had him and have been monitoring him on the roster for quite a bit. And that is kind of all I have to say about the Steelers, man. Their defense is bananas, man. They fly around. Minkah Fitzpatrick is great. You know, TJ Watt is looking as strong as he could be. Like, this is just... There's 3 Watt brothers in the league, and 2 of them out of the 3 so far right now are playing great football. Of course, the other one is still young, so he might be able to change some things around. But, man, TJ Watt is looking crazy. Bud Dupree is looking amazing. That team, just Mike Tomlin, man, he just finds a way every year. And honestly, you just get surprised every time you hear that the Steelers are 5-0 for me. Considering where they were last year, you're just like, wow. It's just just a quarterback just takes you to another level, being able to move the ball. And this is in a year where Juju Smith, once again, is kind of in a weird year. This might just be who he is. Like, honestly, which is kind of scary. You know, first game against New York Giants, let's keep in mind, against New York, 6 receptions, 69 yards, 2 touchdowns, 24.9 points. Second game, 7 receptions for 48, no touchdown, 11 points. Houston, he had a touchdown, 4 receptions, 43. Bye week in week 4, of course, forced upon because of Tennessee, who we'll talk about next segment. And against Philly, he had 4 receptions, 28 yards. You know, they kind of just spread the ball around. He's not a main guy. I think that's the biggest thing. He's not the main receiver threat as what we thought he might be able to become. And that's just what it is. So we're going to take our final break here without a doubt, and we'll be back, finish out the podcast. We'll talk about at least my ideas of what's going to happen in that Saints game and, of course, the Tennessee game on Tuesday. GSMC will be right back.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, we're back for the final segment, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. I hope everybody's still rocking with me. Let's keep it going, shall we? Last segment of the day. And we're just going to go over some games, as most things have kind of teetered and changed a bit. Also, side note, just to, I guess, talk about my little team situation right here. I got to give some shout outs for keeping me in the game, man. I was getting real worried about Miles Sanders. I was getting real worried about Josh Jacobs. But they came through when I needed them most. Now, it's very possible that I'm going to still lose my game this week, as I am down 96-86, and he still has Will Lutz to play, and I have Stephon Diggs left to play, and the Buffalo defense, mind you. But that's where we're at right now. Shout out to DK because he did his thing for his team. I had Russell Wilson, so every time Russell Wilson did something for DK, DK also ate off of Russell Wilson. It's one of those situations where you just wish you weren't playing up against the same people. Justin Jefferson had a pedestrian day. He kind of came back down to earth a bit. But anyway, shout out to Josh Jacobs and Miles Sanders. They really held me down. Russell Wilson does his thing once again. And Amari Cooper, unfortunately, had a really lackluster performance. But I don't really necessarily blame him. Dude had Deontay Johnson on his team. Rest in peace to that. He had Darrell Henderson Jr., which hurt me because I also have him in another league. That's the worst. He had George Kittle, which was probably the reason why I'm still in this game, is that George Kittle had a bad performance. He had Kansas City defense, who had a -1 in this league. I had a -5. Scoring settings, I guess, is different. But let's see if Stephon Diggs and Buffalo defense can do something. You know, I'm not too worried at the fact that I don't have any other players set to go for Tennessee in any of my lineups. So let's go Buffalo. And that will segue into the Buffalo discussion. This will be Tennessee's first game in 2 weeks. They have not played organized football, so to speak. They've had some controversy things happen as they were practicing in limited formats when they were advised not to by the league. No punishment from the league office as far as I know right now, but of course that may change later on. But Tennessee did recently have a test positive coach, I believe Sunday morning or Saturday evening, so I think that is exactly why it was pushed back to Tuesday. Buffalo is on a nice little run here. It would be nice for them to continue on for their division's sake, because the Patriots are also dealing with some COVID-19 issues in their own right. So any way to get a leg up on the division and keep going and keeping the win going. And don't sleep, man. I'm not sitting here and saying Miami's a sleeper team or anything like that. That's a little bit premature, but, you know, games matter. And Miami's starting to put some wins together. And any amount of wins can really help you out at the end of the tunnel. Their defense in Buffalo is for real, especially if they get you from behind. They can just start sending the pass rush after you, and it can get really, really, really good at times. Now, last year, let's remind ourselves that their pass defense was incredible. Their rushing defense was pretty bad. If we go ahead and look at Buffalo's statistics real quick, Buffalo has found their way to kind of limit some things, and that helps when you convert a lot of points and stuff like that. They're not in... What helps your rush defense the most is when your offense can score points, because that takes people out of their normal game script. They're not running the ball as much. They have to throw to compete and get back in the game. So that helps you do that. That's complementary football in the opposite sense, right? People usually say complementary football when your defense plays well. It makes it easier on your offense. When your offense plays well, it definitely makes it easier and a little bit more, it makes it safer to predict what's happening on the field for your defense. And Buffalo's defense is very strong, even though they have had some injuries in the linebacker core. They are still figuring some things out. Josh Allen, this would be a really good game. It'll be on people. Everybody will be watching because it's Tuesday, so everybody gets to see what Josh Allen is capable of. Even though we've been seeing it for the majority of the first quarter of the season, he has been spectacular. Stephon Diggs has been as advertised. Delvin Singletary looks really good and healthy, which is strong. John Brown is as a deep threat. He was already really good last year, and now because he has somebody on the opposite side of him, it helps him become even better. And, you know, their tight end core is pretty solid, you know, good red zone threats. But we all know what happens in the red zone. It's Josh Allen time. So Josh Allen gets in the red zone. He likes to look to take it in himself. and that's just kind of where his MO has been for majority of his career, and that hasn't really changed. That's what makes him one of the best quarterback options in fantasy football to this day. So, Tennessee haven't played in 2 weeks. The whole idea that Derrick Henry gets stronger as the season goes along is a funny realization, but he has not played in 2 weeks. So hopefully he'll have fresh legs and be able to run strong. Now, this will be a good stress test, even though their offensive line is not the greatest right now, as injuries are kind of all over the place. But, this will be a good test for Buffalo's run defense, because we all know what Tennessee likes to do. They're going to feed Derrick Henry about 25 times, and that is what they're going to try and do. I believe A.J. Brown should be healthy to play. I don't believe he's a scratch right now. Corey Davis has had the best start of his career since ever. Like, he came in the league and people thought that he would not pan out because he did not know how to play wide receiver. When you hear something like that, that is very concerning. I would have to say, if it was just me, I would be very concerned if I hear somebody claim that, yeah, we kind of had to teach him how to play wide receiver a bit. We've heard things like this beforehand, but A.J. Brown, he only played one game so far, and he had 5 receptions for 39. If he comes back, that will definitely help his case. He is expected to return after the knee injury, so A.J. Brown should be good to go, and that will help Ryan Tannehill and the lot in their offensive capabilities. It's up to that defense if they can actually stop them from running amok. And let's just get over this New Orleans thing real quick. You know what I have to do. So, the Chargers, I believe, are 12th in receiving yards as far as giving up the most. They are 12th most receiving yards are given up in the league through 4 weeks. That could be very helpful for a Saints team that is starting to find their stride in the passing game. We know what they can do with Alvin Kamara. We know what Latavius Murray has been for them this whole season. That's very helpful. Their run game has been very strong, and I believe they're going to continue to try and lean on it, especially in the very beginning of the game, and try to wear down that Chargers front seven, because when they get going, they can definitely cause some havoc, and they're athletic, even though they are Chargers and injuries, man. Name a better combination. But injuries aside, the Chargers team plays hard, and Justin Herbert can definitely sling the football. So that secondary is going to need to be ready to go. Marshawn Lattimore seems to be ready to play. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is not going to not play. So he's playing, even though the altercation with Michael Thomas. I believe that the opposite corner is going to end up being either, I think it's going to be P.J. Williams, but I could be wrong. But Janoris Jenkins is ruled out for the game. Malcolm Jenkins still safety, and Marcus Williams is going to be the other safety. So the secondary is still kind of trying to get their legs back again, but last week was a much better performance overall. They had some missed opportunities with some interceptions because of some timely penalties. And honestly, the Saints are one of those teams where you just see the penalties that they get and you watch the rest of the league and you're just like, why doesn't anyone else get these calls? But that's beside the point. That might be a little homer in me, but I really do feel like that sometimes, that these Saints start to get calls that just don't make sense. And we understand the Saints were a Super Bowl favorite coming out of the NFC this year, as their roster looked very strong on paper, and then they take a loss to the Raiders, and people are wondering what's going on with Breeze, and then they take a loss to Green Bay on national TV again, and they're like, whoa, what's going on with the Saints? 1-2 is not very good. They were supposed to be one of the better teams, and everybody kind of just moved on accordingly. What they typically do with New Orleans anyway, right? If New Orleans doesn't start off strong like they did in 2009 or 2011, typically they just kind of move on from them and remind themselves what kind of a small market franchise or a small market city New Orleans can typically be when it comes to sports. Like, they just don't attract the biggest market of questions. Like, if they were in Dallas market or even New York, it might be bigger. But that's just the typical end-all be-all of being a New Orleans Saints fan or a New Orleans sports fan in general. But that typically works in the Saints' favor. September is always pretty rough. October is usually much better, and that seems to be what's going. They're getting their stride. They're getting healthy. They're getting their guys back ready to go. So that is promising. And also, I believe that the Raiders are a lot better than what we thought they were. That's the biggest thing. The Raiders are a lot better than what we thought they were. Number one. Number two, and I think the most important thing is the Saints played two teams, or they played one team that was very strong in Green Bay. I think Green Bay is a really strong team. And then now, I believe they're settling in. They're figuring out what they want to do. Drew Brees had 4 games, now 5, once this game is done, to get back into his bag. And now he looked about as good as he's ever did against Detroit, and that's really nice. So I feel like the Chargers can give Brees and the gang some problems, but don't be worried. Now, for fantasy purposes, Alvin Kamara will do what he does best. As long as he's healthy, he's going to continue to be a factor that everybody has to pay attention to. I think Latavius Murray looks really strong as a guy that you may want to put in as your maybe a flex option if he gets in the end zone. And I think that Tre'Quan Smith has kind of risen to the expectations of, or he's kind of exceeded what most people thought he would be. And, you know, I think if he can get like 5 receptions like he has been, that's strong for Tre'Quan Smith. And Drew Brees and Emmanuel Sanders have been figuring some things out as well. So I think the Saints will be fine. I think they pull out the win here. But I'm not going to sit here and say it's going to be an easy one. I think the Saints are going to have to go out and earn it because the Chargers fight. Granted, they don't have Austin Eckler, so that's a big loss. But I'm been a big proponent of the idea that unless you are like complete megastar, and even then that might be a little bit of a stretch because even with Christian McCaffrey, the Panthers look even better. I'm not going to sit here and say that they can't be better with Christian McCaffrey in the lineup. They give him more looks. But you know, I don't think Joshua Kelly and Austin Eckler, even though they're different players, don't be surprised if it seems like Joshua Kelly is a strong running back choice to have when you don't have Austin Eckler in the game anymore because he is out with an ankle. It is going to be an extended amount of weeks that he is going to be missing the field, but that is the reality of the situation for them. So I'm taking Buffalo, and I'm taking New Orleans. I know, kind of going chalk, but that is what is definitely my feelings, and that's our podcast for this week, man. I hope everybody is going to continue on to stay strong here. If you have Dak, stay strong. You'll make it through. I'm going to try and do my best to give you guys the best ideas and the best maneuvers to try and navigate the rest of this fantasy season. And without a doubt, that's the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast for this Tuesday. Please rate, review, subscribe. Everything helps. Don't forget to follow us on our social media. Hit us up, GSMC Fantasy Football on Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you guys Friday, man. So we'll know the results of these 2 games. We'll know the result of the Thursday night game, supposedly, as long as nothing else crazy happens in the league. So I'll see you all guys Friday. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.